Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched What If episode 6? Is it 6? 7? It's 6, right? I've lost count. Episode 6, I think. Let's talk about it. So episode 6 or 7 or something of What If dropped on Disney Plus a few days ago. Okay, so before we get into my thoughts on this episode as a whole, let's just chat. Let's just chat about this release schedule, because I am planning on making a video about the various release strategies that we have seen on streaming platforms in the last few years and their pros and cons. But in terms of the What If release strategy, of course, we have the traditional, we have the classic weekly release, and I think that's all fine and dandy, or at least it would be, if not for the fact that these episodes just feel like, you know, you blink and you'll miss it. Like, truly, like, these episodes just feel so quick. Like, they feel like they go in a blink of an eye, like I said, and I just don't feel like it lends itself to a weekly release schedule. Now, I constantly bang on about another animated series that dropped this year in the form of Invincible. Invincible, which I absolutely loved, and that series actually had a longer run time for each of the episodes, and I think roughly the same number of episodes that What If will have. So that series gave us a bit more time to explore the characters, the storyline, everything in season 1. But in the case of What If, these episodes have consistently been feeling like they are so rushed, truly just so quick in terms of trying to establish each of these different realities, trying to get us to understand these characters and care about their motives and everything, all within like 22 minutes. It's just not enough time. And you get excited initially when you see that it's like a 35-minute episode, and then you remember that the credits are like 90% of that runtime. You remember that the Disney Plus credits are literally like an hour long, so there's really not enough time for the episode itself, and it's a shame because I feel like there is a lot to be explored, like literally infinite realities to be explored, but they're not being done justice, in my opinion, with this runtime. Okay, so my rant about the runtime of these episodes is over for now. Before we dive into more of my thoughts on this episode, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And if you have a fun time with my reviews of What If you could go ahead and give this video a like, that would really help out the channel. Now, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on episode 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't even know which one we're on right now. Okay, so this was the Killmonger episode. This episode brought us way back into 2008, the very beginning of the MCU, where we saw Tony Stark in Afghanistan, and you know, he was hanging out with some soldiers, being all Tony Stark-y, and then all of a sudden the series events play out where he is attacked by this kind of branch of the 10 rings that ended up being not the legit 10 rings, as we find out in Shang-Chi, but instead of the attack going ahead as we saw in the live action Iron Man movie, where he was captured and forced to make the first Iron Man suit for the 10 rings, instead of that series of events playing out, we actually see him be saved by none other than Eric Killmonger, who is voiced by Michael B. Jordan in this episode. So Eric Killmonger ingratiates himself with Tony Stark from the very beginning, and Tony, you know, seeing him as his savior and seeing his track record in the, I think it's Navy, you know, he has a great track record in the military, and he decides to make him his right-hand man. And because Tony never went through the, you know, traumatic experience of being captured and tortured and forced to make these weapons for the other side, that whole character journey that Tony Stark goes through in Iron Man 1 doesn't really happen for him in this episode, and so you see him continue to be a dickhead. continue to be the dickhead that I've been telling you he is. Listen, I'm not the biggest Tony Stark fan, okay? I know a lot of you guys love Tony Stark, okay? But I still assert that if he wasn't portrayed by Robert Downey Jr., you would realize how much nonsense he got away with. He was a warmonger. He was a whole war profiteer, like, please. So I'm not really best friends with Tony Stark. I was always on Team Cap all the way, even though he's also a soldier, whatever. But in this episode, like, please, like, he's even worse because he never went through that character journey that he did in Iron Man 1. And another result of the series of events playing out a bit differently in this episode is that he doesn't naturally find out that Obadiah Stane was behind the double dealings in his company. Instead, Obadiah Stane himself is like outed in the public by Eric Killmonger in like quick fashion. Like truly, Eric Killmonger makes quick work of Obadiah Stane, quickly establishing that he is not going to be the villain of this episode. And another difference in Tony's character arc is, you know, after the events of the live action Iron Man movie, he saw the effects of, you know, his weapons being sold to both sides, and what that did to the local villages in Afghanistan, the people that were held hostage by these terrorist organizations, the people whose lives were put in danger. You know, he saw all of that in Iron Man, but he doesn't experience any of this in the episode. And so his big takeaway from the whole experience isn't some kind of profound lesson about himself and, you know, the direction that his company was going in and, you know, war profiteering in general. No. None of that. Instead, he learns, you know, the bigger the gun, the better it is, especially if he makes sure that the guns go into the hands of the right people, aka the Americans. Like, that's his big takeaway, and Killmonger is more than happy to help him pursue this. He helps him develop these new robots, this new technology. But in this series of events, Tony never developed the arc reactor that provided the Iron Man suit with a ton of energy, and so he has to find an alternate energy source, and Killmonger offers up vibranium. Apparently vibranium can power stuff as well. Listen, vibranium is like this mystical, magical MacGuffin that can basically do anything, okay? But yeah, Killmonger is able to offer up his father's ring, which is made up of vibranium, and so Tony could potentially use that in order to power the suits. And so they have this great collaboration, you know, working together. And then once Tony sees that it works for the suits, he then ascertains that they need to get more vibranium, and that's when we have a link up with the events of Avengers Age of Ultron. But this time around, when we're reintroduced to Ulysses Klaue, he makes a deal with Killmonger instead, and you know, he's trying to get his hands on more vibranium to power those suits. And Ulysses Klaue, being the dodgy dealer that he is, just being the worst that he is, okay, and he is voiced by Andy Serkis in this episode as well, because of course he had to be, right? The deal goes wrong because it is disrupted by none other than the Black Panther. Like, please, what were we expecting? A ton of vibranium just to be sold off real easily? But Killmonger, you know, true to his name, I guess, actually ends up killing the Black Panther. He kills his cousin in cold blood, but not just his cousin. He's not done backstabbing people quite yet, because he also kills Rhodey. So Killmonger is on this mission of like betrayal, on this mission of just wrecking everything, destabilizing whole governments basically. And that's something that we saw from the character in Black Panther, in the film itself, where, you know, one of the things that he learned whilst he was, you know, fighting in the US military is the destabilizations of governments, and, you know, how to infiltrate different governments. You know, just all of these operations that he worked really taught him a lot about global politics that he was able to use. Now, speaking of Black Panther and Killmonger's role in that film, I do feel like he came out as one of the best Marvel villains that we have ever gotten, and it's because of the complexity of the character. You know, people often said of him that he wasn't strictly wrong. Like, he wasn't, his means were a bit questionable, okay, his methods were a little bit side-eye, like, okay, maybe let's not give everyone weapons, maybe that's not going to achieve the end result that everyone would be okay with. But, you know, his ideology, his reasoning, not incorrect. Not incorrect. And that's why I feel like a lot of people connected to the character. I've always connected to the character of Eric Killmonger because I feel like he was such an accurate portrayal of people who believe in Afrocentrism and Pan-Africanism and trying to pursue a bigger, brighter future for Black people who are disenfranchised in all areas of the world. And I really do feel like a lot of people connected with the character of Eric Killmonger because his reasoning wasn't incorrect. He was really standing up for those who were oppressed. The problem is that the means that he wanted to do this by just couldn't be justifiable. And also, if you watch Black Panther, you'll remember that a lot of the things that he was saying was actually echoed by Nakia, but she wanted to go about things in a more diplomatic manner, and that's the way that T'Challa ultimately decided to go down. So yeah, I was really excited to see this episode focus in on the character of Eric Killmonger because I think he is a very worthy villain to focus in on. Again, it's a shame that we didn't really get a chance to allow the relationships that he formed with Tony, for example, to really marinate because the runtime is so short. Like, we were really running through this storyline quite quickly, and as a result, you know, when he does ultimately betray Tony, it doesn't have the same weight to it that it was supposed to, because even though they had a fun time together and we saw that play out for about 5 minutes, it just wasn't enough time. It wasn't enough time to allow breathing space for that relationship to have meaning. But still, in this episode, Killmonger is as ruthless as he was in the live action Black Panther movie. He is killing folks left, right and center. Like, he doesn't even care. Like I said, he killed the Black Panther, he killed Rhodey, and then that caused destabilization in the US government, and they felt forced to retaliate as a result of that because he had framed it on Wakanda. And then, of course, he ends up killing Tony, who figures it out. Like, he is just ruthless. He is ruthless, and we see a tie-in to the live action version of the character in the form of his self-induced scars that he has all over his torso, and he marks another one off after he's killed Tony. Like, just genuinely just so heartless because he is truly a killing machine. And then later on, when he's trying to infiltrate Wakanda, he uses Ulysses Claw to get in and then ultimately kills him. Ultimately kills him just like he did in the film, and then brings him over to the Wakandans as kind of like a bounty. And then okay, so then T'Chaka is alive here, okay, and everyone's a bit younger because it is 2008, so that explains why Shuri's voice is clearly not Letitia Wright, and like, it was a bit disturbing. Like, her voice wasn't my favorite. All of the other voices were great. Like, why did they have to ruin Shuri? Anyway, I know she's a young child, but not my favorite. But T'Chaka is still alive in this series of events. And so when Killmonger goes to the palace in Wakanda, he is faced with T'Chaka. And T'Chaka is, of course, grieving the loss of his son. It's kind of like an opposite situation to what we saw in Black Panther, where he was grieving the loss of his father. And Killmonger is able to prey on them at this vulnerable time by pointing them towards an enemy that he wants to see gotten rid of, as well as trying to ingratiate himself with the Wakandan royal family, presumably so that he can eventually become the Black Panther. Now again, as I keep saying, if we had a little bit more time, maybe it would have been a bit more convincing that T'Chaka would be so easily fooled by Killmonger. Like, I just don't feel like a wise king like T'Chaka would just automatically trust someone because they happen to be his nephew. Like, I feel like he would still have questions. I feel like he wouldn't be so quick to act on the word of Killmonger, in particular when it comes to putting his people at risk. Like, literally thousands of people, you know, not in the actual animation, but hypothetically thousands of warriors going out there fighting against the US army, like a literal war taking place on their land. I don't feel like he would have allowed Killmonger's word to sway things as much as he did in this episode. And even if he did, I feel like, again, the episode needed more time to establish the relationship between the uncle and his nephew in order to make it more convincing. So then at the very end, we get this battle royale between the Wakandans and the US, who are using the robots that were developed by Tony and Killmonger, and he of course knows the ins and outs of these machines, so he is able to give the Wakandans an advantage, even though of course this was all orchestrated by him for some reason. It was a very convoluted plan, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't quite understand why he had to go through, but I guess I do, but at the same time it's like, like, it was pretty convoluted. Like, it was pretty extra, okay? I guess it had to be convoluted for it to be a mishmash of all of these live action MCU films, like the first Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Avengers Age of Ultron, Black Panther. Like, we had to fit all of that in there somehow, and I guess that's how we ended up with such a convoluted plan. But ultimately it leads up to this big battle royale on the field, where we actually get to see the Queen herself fighting, which was so fun. So fun. Like, I think she was badass, and she was voiced by Angela Bassett in this episode as well. So, like, again, like, the voice cast was great. What happened to Shuri? But speaking of Shuri, in this kind of final moment, we do see that she and Pepper seem to be working together because they are suspicious of Killmonger. Now, Pepper was always suspicious of him, and I'm gonna choose to believe it's because she's been around Tony long enough to see when people are trying to use him to get something out of him. Okay, I'm gonna believe that line of thinking. But she isn't the only one who's suspicious of Killmonger, because my girl Shuri was paying attention, and she was like, hold up, who is he? Why are we giving so much trust to him? Like, what's going on? And so she meets up with Pepper. She is dug into Killmonger, and they seem to be working together at the very end there to try and stop him from, I guess, gaining power in Wakanda as its like next king or something. I don't know what's going to happen to him in Wakanda, but yeah, they're gonna stop him somehow, and that's how the episode ends. And you know, first of all, at this point in time, it's clear to me that these episodes are just kind of part ones of an overarching story that we will be seeing explored further either later on in this season, although we're on like episode 6 or 7 now, so we don't really have many episodes left to explore all of these other storylines further. So it may be the case where we get part 2s of these storylines in season 2, although I don't know how that will work, because I know there's going to be an eventual convergence of these different realities, and we will get this kind of Avengers level finale likely. So maybe they're going to tie things up with that finale. But either way, combined with the short run times of these episodes, as well as these constant cliffhangers at the end of each episode, I do feel like the episodes that we have gotten so far are just a part of an overall story. And secondly, an astute observation that my brother made. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for this one, okay? But he did notice that the Watcher seems to, you know, he's watching, he's doing what he does best, but he seems to be doing it closer and closer to the series of events than he was previously. Because previously in the early episodes of the series, we saw maybe like his eyes occasionally, or maybe just like a silhouette, but then it became like literally closer and closer. And in this episode, we actually saw the Watcher himself, and it seemed as though he was very close to the series of events taking place. So I feel like, again, as I've been saying, I think that this is hinting that he will be involved at some point. He will interfere eventually with the series of events taking place, and I think we're getting closer and closer to that happening, because he's literally getting closer and closer to these events. But that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on What If episode 6, 7? I think it's 6. I think it's I think it's 6. It's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.